My name is Andrea Gammon, and I'm hosting and moderating this part of the program. What we're going to do for the next half hour is we're first going to have a talk from Yke Bauke Eisma, who is assistant professor at the TU Delft of cognitive robotics. And responding to Yke's talk will be Floris Schönfeld, an artist who has an installation here that I hope that you've seen or will have a chance to see. They'll both speak for about 5 minutes, kind of introducing their ideas in conversation with each other. And then we'll have a time to ask questions and have a discussion. So I'll ask maybe an opening question. If you have questions, try to keep them in mind, and we'll circulate a mic so that you have a chance to ask as well. And we have about 30 minutes, so that's plenty of time for a lot of interaction. So let me first introduce Yke Bauke Eisma, who will be speaking. Again, he is assistant professor of cognitive robotics at TU Delft.
Thank you. So yeah, I've written everything down, so I'll be reading and looking into the public as well. But I've written down the title of this small introduction is The Speaking Model. Language is a primary force in the technological age. The rise of large language models, in my opinion, presents a paradox. In an era seemingly governed by mathematical abstraction, language unexpectedly claims primacy in the technological progress. This challenges the decades-long view that physics and mathematics, through complex yet internally simple models, accessible mainly to academics, were the exclusive path to the essence of reality, eidos in a Platonic term. Science traditionally aims to capture nature's law via representation. In contrast to this exactness, language was often relegated to the imprecise realm of everyday conversation and interaction, seemingly far removed from scientific exactness. But today's scientific progress unfolds itself in and through language, in my opinion, revealed by large language models like you have seen online, like ChatGPT, Claude, and Google's Gemini, and the likes. Driven by an immense computational powers, these modernly seemingly yet let language itself speak, in my opinion. There is really unprecedented power in them within this non-precise realm and pluriform medium of language. For me, this suggests that the ground and the truth of the nature of animals, everything around us, of cosmos, may not reside primarily in scientific abstraction, but reveals itself more strongly, more fully through language. Unlike scientific and reductive models that strive for a single world formula, language's manifold medium allows things their multiplicity. So everything is more than one. Enormous pragmatic, in my opinion, and scientific progress now manifests within the language-centric approach. So language is the base for all this new scientific progress. And this progress highlights, in my opinion, language's immense foundational strength. The dynamic and unpredictable nature around us seems more at home here than in rigid science. Nature is known in how language itself speaks, akin to poetry or art, which presents which presents the whole manifold, resisting scientific reduction to the singular, to what is just here. Science inherently separates its idealistic formulas from what is. A division language seemingly avoids, and it prevents the silencing of nature's own expressive power. Language, in that sense, is nature itself. Large language models appear to let language speak without a human reductive scientific filter. Though they are termed large language models, paradoxically, I have to say, nature itself seems to speak through them with less human mediation. Language acquires a self-standing, in German you would say a Selbstständigkeit, an ability to voice things directly. But the core paradox remains here. How can systems based on mathematical reduction, like the transformer architecture, which is the neural network that goes behind all these large language models, elevate language without merely confirming that it is mathematics that goes behind them? So you're just reducing language to mathematics. But in my opinion, a purely technical or technological analysis falls short here. we need to we need to have a philosophical perspective, because what happens with large language models is not to be reduced to its constituent parts, but it reduces something or reveals something more than a mathematical reduction, something powerful, I feel, perhaps alienating or estranging. So the dizzying pace of large language model development and improvement hints at forces, in my opinion, that potentially exceed the mere increase in computational power. This evokes Martin Heidegger's, a German philosopher, insight, not we speak language, but language speaks us. In the rise of large language models, perhaps language speaks us and nature forth more, fundamentally bypassing the human to voice the previously unspoken. Something significant seems on the way towards language, demonstrating its vibrant aliveness. Perhaps this self-speaking language offers a possibility of re-embedding ourselves within the great happening of nature itself, not as a detached scientist that reduces, but as participants within the great fabric of language and thereby of speaking nature itself. In my opinion, this journey has just begun and its destination remains uncertain. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Yke. Yeah, I thought I'd respond partially to that, but we're going to get into that as well. But I'm also going to say a little bit about the work that I've presented, and that was also kind of one of the starting points for the conversation we were going to have. I'd say I think you can't really see it, but for those of you who haven't seen it, it's over here. Take a look, maybe afterwards, or now. That's fine by me. This work is called Natura, or Natura Body, and it's a work that I developed when I lived in California in the Bay Area for a few years, and this work is very heavily influenced by you could say kind of the California ideology vibe that I encountered there at the time. This is kind of like 2012, around that time. What I'd set out to do with the work is create a fictional artificial intelligence. That artificial intelligence is called Natura, and Natura is in a way that what I was very interested in is kind of this embodied, disembodied aspect of AI, and that's something that Yke is pointing to as well, where in a way where language becomes a kind of disembodied element that sort of is in the world, and I think actually what I was trying to do with this work, it's a speculative work, so it takes a sort of fictional beginning point, where an AI has been developed to the point where it actually kind of has transcended its hardware and kind of gone out into the world. And that's what I sort of was working with that scenario. And then my question was, how can I make that AI present? And this work is one of a series of works. There's another work in which I work with a group of actors or performers, and that work takes place in California as a landscape, and it shows a group of people who are trying to make a connection with this artificial intelligence, with Natura. And this work is called Natura Body, and what it's actually trying to do is give a feel for what that sort of disembodied AI that has gone into the world, that has gone into the natural world, could be. And I did that by going to a studio in Massachusetts, which is run by a man who unfortunately has passed away. His name is Douglas Trumbull, and he was a visual effects specialist. So, and this is before digital visual effects. So this was in the time where visual effects were physical elements that would be sort of used. And his first film was actually Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey, or Space Odyssey 2001. He did that when he was 24, which I still find completely mind-blowing. And those visual effects are still, in my opinion, some of the most, like groundbreaking visual effects that have influenced cinema a lot. So, and then afterwards he did the films like Blade Runner, and he did a lot of the Star Trek films, and yeah, he's within that world very well known. But what I had the chance to he set up this studio for visual effects, and I had a chance to make this work there. And in doing that, I was using physical, like what you see is inks and milk, and for instance, ferrofluids, which are these magnetic fluids that you can make move with a magnet, for instance. And what I was trying to evoke was, in a way, kind of two perspectives. Like the left perspective is very much a sort of micro perspective, like almost a sort of inner body perspective, and the other perspective is a kind of cosmic wide perspective. All kind of through that, this question of what would happen if. Okay. Sorry. Okay, no worries. The question of sort of what would happen if this language, if this pure kind of like language-based entity would enter a physicality. I think that was very much the question, and the project as a whole, it does sort of ask that question, and I think it is a question that actually underlies a lot of scientific endeavor as well, which is where does the word for something become the thing? Where does the map become the territory, and kind of vice versa? And so in that sense, it's a work that kind of comes from also, yeah, it fits well with the theme, I guess, of the festival. But I think the moment where we are now, is an incredibly interesting moment because there is this kind of literally large language models that are using language as their kind of core sort of infrastructure is becoming physical, is becoming going into the world, and I think that's a very interesting place, and this was like 10 years ago or longer that I made this work, but I feel that transition was already you could already kind of feel that maybe when I was in California at the time, that there's something, not that I knew what was going to happen going forward, but there was this kind of heavy focus on like the potentiality of AI, and this work is also a reaction to that.
My microphone, sorry.
Oh no, then
that's okay. You can hold on. Hold on to that one. I have one also. Okay, thank you both for your introduction talks, I suppose. Maybe, so what I'll open to questions from the audience in a moment. So if you already have questions, maybe you can start to formulate them, or maybe signal. I think there should be someone with a mic circulating. If not, I can also go and give you my mic. So this was really nice, and I think you've already spoken together already about the connections between your thinking about large language models and your art. And I feel like many of you haven't actually seen Floris's art, so I would encourage you to. It's kind of a nice backdrop that I can see that you can't. So one question that I have, just off maybe to open things up, as Floris was describing, one of these kind of looping screens is kind of, it looks quite cellular, it looks quite micro level, and then the other is like a kind of cosmic level. And both of these are levels that are like, these are kinds of like levels of abstraction that are like kind of foreign to human everyday experience, right? Like they're kind of like non-human in some way. I think that's part of what you're trying to capture. And when I hear what Yke is saying about language as possibly being able to capture nature, or like, this is the time of the large language model, and the hope is that it can kind of encapsulate the non-human. I wonder about that, though. I mean, language is so human, and actually, in environmental philosophy, this long-standing problem is, well, we can't make nature speak in the way that we do. We can't necessarily go ask for permission from non-human animals or whatever, and we have to deal with the fact that we are working in this modality that just isn't what the rest of the world works in. And so I wonder, there is this hope that you have that nature kind of can be represented, but are there any kind of worries that there will be some things that are just not included because because language would be a limiting kind of modality?
That's a very interesting question and also perspective on the matter. I think that if you turn it a little bit around, do we speak language, or is language in part also speaking through us, right? And us that is being expressed in words and sentences. But somehow a language sort of gives nature itself a voice too. It makes sort of it gives a sort of self-awareness to nature, right? When I speak, I can hear myself, so sort of nature opens up to itself. So obviously in human language, this is done through speech, but I feel that large language models, when they're trained on large amounts of data, when they're trained long enough, they can also start, at least give us an indication as to what sort of the not speaking part of this world might feel, because it has so much data in itself. So we start listening to what language has to say us, instead of we starting to sort of manipulate it. I don't know if I'm really clear on that, but obviously animals don't speak, but still large language models can give us a perspective on what it is to be an animal, I feel. Yes, make it more objective to a certain extent.
There's actually some quite one of the projects I did last year. I did a residency at Artis, at the zoo and sort of knowledge center in Amsterdam, and one of the areas of research I had was sort of animal communication and the possibility of animal communication. And in a way, like actually AI is being used in some of the research I came across as a kind of translation tool for animal languages. So in various sort of in whale song and various other animal languages. So I think that it can have this quite interesting translating role, maybe, rather than capturing the true essence of language kind of role. And I think that's for me as well, like the idea that the current AI models are also based on human language, and I do see that as a limitation. For me, let's say, what would a chatbot that was trained on whale communication be, for instance? I think that would actually be a really interesting question. Also in how it would not just in kind of what comes out, because that would interest me too, but also in how would that would the architecture of the model change, and what would that tell us? And so I think in a way, again, this capability of translating for me is very interesting, and translation as an idea is key there. But saying, let's say, finding and I do think that this is an underlying thing that science has been, or let's say maybe a scientistic approach of like that there is a universal language, for instance, that underlying everything is a universal language. It's a very old scientific idea. I mean, this is maybe going back like way further than what might be relevant now, but that idea of like of language let's say that science is understanding, maybe if you want to say it that way, the language of God, and speaking the language of God, like that by understanding the language of God, you can speak to God. I think that idea, if you tie that to chatbots and LLMs and current, I think there is a danger there, let's say, of taking that too literally. But where I agree with you a lot is that as an intermediary, as a space where all these different logics can come together, I think it's an absolutely fascinating space.
Yeah, I think also that language it becomes disconnected to a certain extent from the human speaker, right? So it in itself, in a large language model, is starting to speak. It's not that it needs to be spoken by humans, but in itself, it's becoming a power in a large language model. I think that's very powerful. If you can capture everything, well, maybe not. Not everything maybe comes to language, but at least it's very interesting to see that a very sort of subjective way of expressing ourselves becomes more and more objective in these large language models, right? So it just represents sort of a different reality in which somehow a lot of answers exist to a lot of problems. Sort of this is the power apparently language has, which fascinates me.
Okay, maybe we should see if there are questions from the audience. If you have a question or a comment even, you can put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. Is there anyone who wants to weigh in? Be brave. Yeah, okay. Let me come to you. Use this mic. I think it will still work. I've been instructed not to leave the stage.
I just wondered what emotion has to do with all this. So, because that to me, as it's frequency, so it's vibrations and not words. How does that play a role?
Do you want to direct this to either person or just in general? And you heard the question. The question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I think it is a really great question, and it's a relevant question. I think for me, as an artist, I think that's a very important question, and it's actually one that I've been finding very hard to answer if I look at how generative AI and large language models or like LLM sort of AI is being used for let's say art at the moment, and that is largely in generating images or video or music. And what's interesting is that all of those systems are based on prompts. They're based on descriptive language. You have to type something in and then something comes out, like an image and a lot of artists are, and this is maybe excluding writers, but even writers, I'd say, are not necessarily interested in describing something. We're interested in making something, and we're interested in doing something and having those actions create a meaning and having those, and I think that's where, for me, at least, and this is the current iteration, I don't think this is a long-term limitation of these systems, but the way it's being used now, I think, does limit that side of things, and it limits a kind of a direct connection that we have to emotion, which is bodily sometimes, or let's say is the stroke of an arm, or and I do think that that is lacking in, and let's say you can describe emotion, but again you don't quite get there. Like you're always lacking something, and you could say the same of art, but I do think art does a better job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think emotion also expresses itself in language. For example, in poetry, or in drama, or in books. So, as a human species, we also have adjusted to a certain extent to translate our emotions, our feelings into something that others are able to understand. However, not all poems are understood widely, obviously, but I think given our ability to express ourselves in language in very artistic ways is also a way to interact with these models. For example, in my own research, we try to see whether we can use these models to alleviate people that experience loneliness. Whether such a system can, for example, showcase real empathy. And to a certain extent, that is the case. So also scientific research points in that direction, that we can use these models to support people, and that it alleviates us to a certain extent, that it somehow understands us too, and we feel less lonely. So there are some, obviously it's not perfect, absolutely not, but we are going in a certain direction that indeed these large language models, they resonate on a more fundamental level with human beings.
We have time for one more question if there's a final question. Yeah, I'll come down. I see a couple. I'm going to go to the front.
Hi, maybe I missed it, but could you explain to me again what the connection between this form of art and AI is?
So it's not because the funny thing is that this is actually would potentially be generatable at this point. Maybe not one-on-one, but at this point in sort of like video generative video work. But the connection is actually in the story. So the story that I tried to tell with this project is the story of this AI called Natura, that has kind of transcended its like binary computer basis and kind of gone out into the world, gone out into nature. And what this is trying to do, you could say it's like a kind of like a portrait of this AI, but it's completely unportrayable because it's like everywhere. So it's like an impossible portrait, but it is trying to. And in trying to, it's sort of taking on these very different perspectives. So let's say the very micro perspective and the very macro sort of cosmic perspective. Yeah, and so you can kind of find it within this, maybe.
Yeah, I think so, to be honest. That's very nice. Yeah, it's very sort of prophetic in the sense that you were able to see it in that way, because I feel that what I try to explain too is that language or large language models, somehow it's more, these large language models are more than the sum of their parts, right? So the effect it has on us as humans, as a society, is larger than when you would calculate it based on its mathematical foundations. There is a sort of effect, a surplus, so to speak, that is not to be reduced to mathematics, which I think is also very nicely represented here. Doris.
If you haven't had a chance to look at the Natura body, please make sure that you do. It's quite mesmerizing. But let's first thank Floris and Yke again. Yeah.
Doris.
And thank you for being here. There will be a pen test, the third run of the pen test, I think in 15 minutes in this space, so stick around if you're interested in that.